Good evening, everyone. It's November 23rd, 2021. This is a meeting of the Victoria Park improvements, specifically the spray pad and the sun shelter. My name is Maureen Wilson. I'm the councillor for Ward 1, very proud to be so and very happy to be here with you. Thank you for joining us. I read out the date because we are having to engage virtually still, and to also let you know that the meeting is being recorded, and we will be posting this video on the Ward 1 website, because I'm sure there are some people who wanted to be here but were not able to make this date and this time. So we want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to have access to the same information. So just FYI, it is being recorded. I'm going to read a land acknowledgement. The city of Hamilton is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabeg to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We further acknowledge that this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Today, the city of Hamilton is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we recognize that we must do more to learn about the rich history of this land so that we can better understand our roles as residents, neighbors, partners, and caretakers. So joining me this evening is some people who are going to be able to provide information, put it into context, and offer their great insights. I'll go from the top on my screen anyway. John Vandriel from Landscape Architectural Services with the City of Hamilton. Also, Wes Kindry, also from Landscape Architectural Services with the City of Hamilton, and Cindy Rowan from Foret Consulting. Thank you all for being here. So this is our agenda. What are we doing and why are we doing this, and putting it into context, and then an overview of those park improvements, and then how to get involved, and the Q&A, of course. So this evening, we're presenting some design concepts of the spray pad and the sun shelter based on some initial consultation that we had completed earlier this year. And this is a continuation of the dialogue between you and between us and staff. Why are we doing this? In 2018, I campaigned to be, with the wish to be the councillor and serve you in Ward 1. And I also, during that time, spoke about the importance of public space as part of a healthy, viable, resilient, inclusive city. And the belief that there is inherent value in public space. There, unfortunately, are fewer and fewer places where we can meet people who are different from ourselves. And it's an important component of a strong community is to have a place where we can go and know our neighbors, see our neighbors, and learn about each other. And interestingly, there are more economists these days talking about that value of social capital than there are social scientists, because it is very real. And I think Victoria Park is just such an asset, not only to Strathcona, but to the broader neighborhood that goes beyond those boundaries. And so we're going to continue to invest in those spaces because the rate of return in so many ways is great. And we do need those investments. And I think it's fair to say that the pandemic underscored how important it is to have places to roam and get outside and to play. And so in so doing, we're also continuing that legacy of the Victoria Park Master Plan, which began in 2007. And it was a multi-year park renewal plan. And there were different ways and means of consulting with the neighborhoods. And as part of that, we're honoring those neighbors who came together at that time and invested their time and their insight, and continuing on with some of the themes and ideas and priorities that they set out then and now. And there's it's a very long timeline. Just to give, we also appreciate that there are new people who move into the neighborhood over time. And sometimes this legacy of when something started and what happened, it's lost. And in a way, that's a good thing, because if we don't, if new people don't move in, we can, cities can grow static. And so it's, I think, a vote of confidence also when people move into our neighborhood and bring their experiences. But as you can see from this timeline, the Victoria Park Master Plan was initiated in the spring of 2005. And all of those little dots along that, that squiggly line represents consultation points and key deliverables along the way. More of the same. I don't want to talk too much tonight. I think I've talked enough. But as part of that consultation, there was the request for some sort of sun shelter identified. And that piece is outstanding. And we'd like to close that loop and get that work done for you, for your use in the park. And we also know that the spray pad is well beyond its useful life and has been having some tinkering done to it in an effort to extend that life. But it's time for a new pad. So this is an opportunity to look at that space itself and how those two pieces could interface together.
I think I'll continue on with this discussion now to just provide some context and background as to why we're doing this, and just to kind of continue on what we've been discussing so far. Victoria Park, as many of you may know, has many, is a community park with many park amenities in it. Our area of focus that we'll be looking at tonight is situated at the north end of the park, north of the tennis courts, which you can see in that red circle at the top of the screen. Zooming in a bit closer, more specifically, we're focusing, as the councillor mentioned, on the area between the existing spray pad and the existing playground area. You may have seen some work happening in the park last summer, so in the summer of 2020. That was the archaeological investigation that took place, whereby an archaeologist came in to dig up test pits at the north end of the site to basically document and uncover any culturally significant elements that they may have come across. The investigation itself was meant to inform the design and location of new park amenities, and it also would look at mitigation measures and methods to construction. One of the things that was uncovered was the foundation of a structure that once stood in the park called the Crystal Palace. For those of you who were at the initial consultation meeting in February of this past year, we spoke about this in great detail and the significance that this structure once had in relation to the city's development. And you'll see more of that Crystal Palace structure come through the design concepts that we'll display in the next several slides. So what we heard from previous consultation, we held our initial consultation, as I mentioned, back in February this year. And we heard several important points that we wanted to consider as we develop these concepts for the space. Considerations include locating both the spray pad and the sun shelter in proximity to the existing spray pad and play structures themselves. So really understanding how they relate and that close relationship to one another. Considering the kind of natural gathering focal point that each of these spaces create for people to come together. Considering pedestrian and cyclist circulation, we do acknowledge that these are routes people don't just come to the park, but they also pass through the park. So we really wanted to recognize that as well. We also do want to pay tribute to that formal Crystal Palace structure that once stood at the site. And we heard that from many people in our previous consultations. We also did hear the value of preserving some of the large existing mature trees. This is what gives Victoria Park a lot of its character. And we recognize that, and we really want to do our best to try and preserve as many of these large mature trees as we can. So now I'll just get right into the concepts. This led us to prepare, looking at what we had heard so far and doing our own analysis with our design team. This led us to prepare 2 design concepts, each with their own unique layout and design components that I'll walk you through right now. So this is concept number 1. We call it Remembering the Crystal Palace. This concept design presented here shows the stylized outline of the formal Crystal Palace foundation, which you can kind of see in the octagon shape, that line work that you see on the design there. The concept features a new sun shelter, resembling the historic layout and architectural details of the Crystal Palace, and in the location of the current spray pad where it is now. You can see by the rendering up at the top, this is kind of what we had in mind potentially for what a new sun shelter could look like, resembling what you see at the top of your screen as well. That picture to the right is the actual, is a photograph, a historical photograph of what the old Crystal Palace structure looked like. A new spray pad located slightly north follows the outline of the Crystal Palace foundation, with a paving pattern and ground jets that representing the facade details of what the Crystal Palace once looked like. The design also includes additional seating areas and overall carefully preserves the maple trees and existing pathway layout. This is concept 2. We title it Stylizing the Crystal Palace. This concept design presented here remembers the Crystal Palace itself, but with a more contemporary flair. Here, the sun shelter is shifted northward toward the playground and brings more of a modern feel to the site. You can see by the rendering up at the top of the screen, that kind of more curvilinear structure. It also has a closer relationship to the existing amenities around it. So kind of situating itself between the future spray pad and the existing playground area just north of there. A new spray pad itself is shifted northward from where it sits today. It also traces the outline of the original Crystal Palace foundation. It includes vertical spray features, which kind of mimic the Crystal Palace facade itself. And you can see that in the sketches on the right-hand side. And what we mean by vertical features of a spray pad are the elements that you see on the top left of the screen. So elements that kind of provide a lot of interesting and kind of fun, playful things for kids to interact with while they're using the spray pad itself. The existing spray pad area, so this is the area that's highlighted now in red that you see, now becomes more of a hexagonal plaza space laid out similarly to the what was similar to the foundation, the original foundation location of the Crystal Palace. The new seating blocks here also mark the corners of the original footprint. So it provides kind of that more passive plaza space with the 2 amenities being the spray pad and the sun shelter shifted over to the north side to kind of allow for the circulation and the pathway alignment of the existing pathway network to be preserved. What we're looking at for timeline, so that, I guess just to recap there, that's kind of a summary of what the 2 spaces or the 2 concepts we have that we're presenting to you tonight. Where we are tonight with respect to timeline of this overall project, as the councillor and Stephanie mentioned earlier in the year, we did some community engagement with members of the local community in February. We also issued a survey for spray pad features, and many people commented on what they wanted to see with respect to spray jets and vertical features and things like that, which we've tried to include in this design. As I mentioned earlier, we were undertaking some studies, some archaeological investigations underway earlier this year and late last year. We're now at the point of doing follow-up consultation with you tonight, as well as the site planning and the detailed design stage. So this is where we are now, where you can see in the red dotted line. Where we're going still is our next step of the process will be to select a design, or at least develop a preferred design based on what we hear from the public tonight, which will then inform the detailed design. This detailed design will then be used to prepare construction drawings and document preparation for a construction contract, which will then inform and be used to take with us to anticipated construction beginning anticipated for the summer of next year, 2022. To recap now, just kind of on where we are with all of this. As the councillor mentioned, these are much needed life cycle replacement work in the park. So these two spaces are needed to implement also the master plan and following through with that implementation. And overall, the improvements will add value to the existing user experience in Victoria Park. We hope that the community will see this place as additional added value. We're excited to be a part of this process and to share some of our designs with you tonight. And we, of course, look forward to hearing from you more and more. So how to get involved and stay informed? Well, tonight is the virtual public meeting that we're holding. And as the councillor mentioned, we'll also be uploading this for those who may have missed it to be able to see how we've explained these concepts. But we'll also want to hear what you think about these designs. We have a survey uploaded that will be uploaded tomorrow morning for the public to complete, and it will be open until December 7th, so for about 3 weeks or so. You can find that survey on engage.hamilton.ca. And on there, you'll be able to look at the concepts in a bit more detail, take a look at kind of how that spatial relationship looks, as well as comment on what you think of the actual design of these features and what we kind of are proposing right now. There's also we'll also be keeping everyone updated through website updates. We do have a city project page right now. As I mentioned, the engage.hamilton.ca project page where you can have links to the survey. There's also another project page, hamilton.ca/Victoria Park improvements. And I'll show that to you in one moment. Who's listening and contacts? This is my contact information right here at the bottom of your screen. If you do have any questions about this after this meeting, please do feel free to reach out. We'll do as best we can to answer some of your questions or concerns, and really try and inform everyone as to how we see this shaping up in the year to come. So that concludes my discussion and my presentation. As I mentioned, the websites, particularly the way to get involved for commenting on these concepts through survey is www, as I mentioned, .engagehamilton.ca/Victoria Park. The actual project webpage for this project is hamilton.ca/Victoria Park improvements.
The original master plan started in 2005. Now we are 17 years later. When does the next new plan continue? How long do these plans take to come to fruition, generally speaking?
These plans can, I mean, right now I'll give an example of a master plan for a different park that we were doing in the city. And we were looking at, we had just completed that master plan process and adopted the master plan. And we're looking at projects for at least 25 years. These are park master plans that take quite a while to implement because there's such large parks with so many different components in them. So with respect to when a potential next master plan will be, we would need to get direction on that from senior management and even perhaps from council as to when another master plan would take place. But at this point in time, we're still at the point of implementing the master plan that was put in place for us several years ago. We do, however, acknowledge that these plans can change over time and that there are components of these plans that have the ability to change too, recognizing that the neighborhood changes and that the needs of the neighborhood can change over time too. I'm not sure if Councillor Wilson if you have any comment on that as well.
We still have some outstanding assets in this park that require our attention, including the pool. We are hoping to move ahead with an accessible washroom, doing that feasibility work soon in the field house. And then it becomes a balance of doing work as opposed to doing study and finishing and adding finishing the commitments, committing into finishing that work. And I don't know if Wes, you would like to comment on the number of parks that this city has the pleasure of caretaking, but it's considerable. And
so yes, as Councillor Wilson mentioned, we do have an extraordinary number of parks within our city, which keeps on growing for us. So when we look at that master plan, as John mentioned earlier, it does go on for a long period of time as we work with capital budget to make sure that we appropriately distribute those funds that are available for the parks within the wards and for those needs. So as John mentioned earlier as well, that the needs of those parks change with the demographics of the area and really what the trends are for recreational use. So the master plans do seem like they go for a long period of time, but they really provide us a roadmap on how we get to what we envision that park to look like in the end. So they're really useful, but they do take a lot of patience to understand that this is implemented over a multiple year phased approach as budget allows.
Jenny's asking, will the anticipated construction timeline limit use of the existing splash pad in the summer?
The answer is that it might. We are still kind of refining that process right now as to how we see construction unfolding. Of course, it may depend too on where the spray pad does get located and the servicing that's required to bring servicing to the new spray pad while still keeping the new one going or keeping the existing one going. This is something that we will need to work in more detail with respect to the scheduling of construction. We know that this general area will be disrupted for a chunk of time next year. So we do acknowledge that and we also acknowledge that this will require patience from the community too. The existing spray pad is getting very old and is in need of replacement. So it may be some coordination that may be required to try and have one implemented, but there may also be disruptions to the existing spray pad in the process.
Going to option 1, if you could bring that up on the screen. Can you explain, can we get an explanation of this shade structure placement in option 1? It's right where the paths converge. Wasn't this identified as a pinch point? And then Melanie also is piggybacking on that in that there already is quite a bit of shade in that section. So why, is there an explanation as to why you still consider that spot for a shade structure?
The shade structure, we wanted to show one example with a shade structure as kind of the where the pathways meet, to act as kind of a central gathering space. So that is kind of why the placement was there. We do recognize that there is a bit of a pinch point with respect to bikes and things moving around that way. But we do want to provide that ample pathway space around the structure itself, as you can see by the drawing. With respect to why there's a shade structure there, because there's trees there, we acknowledge that these trees are very old at the moment. They are in relatively healthy condition, fair condition at the moment, but they're not going to be around forever. And so recognizing that, we do want to come up with a plan that makes sense for a shade structure in the long term. Again, this is just one location for a sun shelter. A lot of people in our previous consultations expressed the interest in putting it as kind of a central gathering node space where the pathways converge. And so that's kind of what we wanted to show, at least for one concept, to allow people to either really agree with where the location is, or comment that they would like to see it somewhere else. And I'm going to actually just pass this off to maybe Cindy Rowan from Forec, if you wanted to even provide some more design insight as to pathway, or as to placement of the shade structure itself in that location.
Certainly, yes. As Jonathan mentioned, we did see an opportunity to locate the shade structure in a central location to really provide that central gathering space, and at the same time, really enhance the celebration of the Crystal Palace by placing a structure that's very much like the central feature of that building and its cupola in a location that's very close to, if not on, the location of that actual architectural features. So in order to make this work a little bit better, we did adjust the orientation of a little bit for the path and the new plaza. It is expanded, so while currently it's a bit of a pinch point because that circle or the oval shape where the spray pad is currently is a bit tight, and so it's a tight radius, a little hard to get around. This is actually quite a bit larger, and expanded, so it's going to be much easier to navigate this outer perimeter path. So it's just shown as an option because we felt that it had some value being looked at in this location.
So comparing the two budgets, the two concepts, is the budget for them the same, or does one cost more than the other? Are you able to expand on what the cost of these two concepts are in contrast?
One budget, but with two concepts that show this similar elements, so that the cost itself does not change between one concept and the other. We want to try and build either concept, whatever we decide, given the budget that we have stipulated at the beginning of this project. So the answer to that question is no, the budget does not change between one. It's not like one costs more than the other. We see this as being the same with respect to comparing budgets in that sense.
In the first concept, will there be signage or other interpretive features to give folks a better idea about what the Crystal Palace was?
Yeah, that's a great question. We there is actually a sign in the park right now that's closer to where the existing wooden gazebo is. So closer to the center of the park, explaining what the Crystal Palace was all about and the history of that. However, that sign itself isn't really connected to where the location of it is. So what we would want to do is potentially relocate that interpretive sign, but then also, yes, expand the signage and expand the educational piece as to what this site used to be, to really help people understand the design, the placement of things, and help people learn about what used to be there.
The Crystal Palace was an agriculture and industrial showcase. Will the sun shelter be capable of being used for, say, a small farmer's market? The palace was also able to host concerts. Could it be used for that as well?
Ooh, that's I don't know about concerts necessarily. I think it has the ability, the sun shelter, to host perhaps small little vendors. This particular sun shelter is larger than what you would see in a neighborhood park. But again, it's not a obscenely massive structure either. It's about 175 square meters. If I'm not mistaken, Cindy, I think we did the we did the square footage estimates to kind of determine what the parameters would be on that and what would make most sense for a community park. So with that footprint and with that space that allows, it would allow for things like, a small little art display, art exhibits and displays like that. Potentially some maybe impromptu outdoor music, but something in a much formal, larger setting. I don't know if it would lend itself to that, but it could certainly be used for more organic and potentially organized events that are a bit smaller in nature.
Thanks. Matthew is asking, is there a budget for the shelter and then a separate budget for the splash pad? If you somehow save money on the shelter, can those savings be contributed to the splash pad?
So potentially, this is something that the spray pad and sun shelter are being looked at in one, and we'll have one budget attached to this larger project. Of course, these two park amenities are budgeted in isolation, but not necessarily because they are part of one large contract. If we did get an indication from the public that a spray pad was more important and the level of effort into creating a spray pad was higher or was deemed more favorable than a sun shelter, then perhaps we could adjust things. We're also, just to give a bit of context here too, because this is a community level park, we do look at our parameters with respect to how large a spray pad can be, and work within those parameters too. So we want to adhere to what kind of park standards and our park and open space development guide says, for both standards of spray pads and standards of sun shelters. That being said, if one needs to become a little larger and one needs to become a little smaller, I think we're still open to that at this point in time. But we would want to secure that and make those decisions, within a reasonable amount of time to move forward with the design.
If I could, Jonathan, sorry, if I could just add that both of these projects are being, we have a number of park things on the go, but I'm pretty sure that both of these items are being funded from Ward 1 area rating dollars. So they will be kept within the area rating, the Ward 1 budget, and fulfill this obligation that we have.
How many people will the shade shelter in option 1 How many would it accommodate, and would seating be provided within it?
So a spray or a sun shelter like this can accommodate anywhere from 5 to 25 people, I believe, perhaps give or take, depending on how close everyone is sitting. With respect to seating, what the city typically does is puts picnic tables beneath sun shelters, where these new, especially when new sun shelters are implemented in parks. So what you'd probably see shortly after this sun shelter has been opened to the public are, at least at minimum, a couple of picnic tables beneath for people to sit down, because we do recognize that, yes, this is a place where people want to gather, but also a place of people want to just take shelter and sit and enjoy themselves in the shade. So there will at minimum be a couple of picnic tables put in this place. And that's typically the standard of what we do in most of our parks across the city.
But you also talked about the ability to have some flexibility in its use. I think reference was made to a small food vendor or art vendor. And so having those portable seating places will allow for the community and the neighborhood to determine kind of that use in part.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's important, I think, to keep these spaces flexible for that very reason. And having kind of movable seating, as the counselor mentioned, is an optimal way of doing this, because it allows for various types of programming to occur at any point in the future.
Do you have an approximate square footage for option 1, this shelter?
So the sun shelter itself is around 175 square meters.
Mhm. And the water play area, and this is approximately how big as well?
This one's around 250, 200 to 250.
At this stage of the design process, could you combine the two concepts? Example, place the shelter from option 1 where the shelter is located in option 2. Where will there be a chance to comment on the detailed design when that's complete?
So the response to the first part of that question is yes, there is still opportunity to relocate or shift the amenities around. And yes, there is opportunity to comment on this at this stage. And this is actually where we really want to hear from people on these types of things. In the survey, we've asked questions specifically related to that. Do you agree with, or do you like the placement of these amenities? If you don't and you want to see something changed, we have areas where you can write comments in a couple of comment boxes. And that's where we'd love to hear your feedback as to whether you believe it should be changed or shifted over. If you like one style sun shelter and want it to be placed in a different a different location of where the concept 2 is, we want to ultimately develop a preferred concept, and whether that concept becomes a hybrid of both of these two, we're open to that at this point. But we would like to hear your feedback on that at this juncture, because the detailed design will proceed then to construction. And so the detailed design, essentially, we're preparing drawings to get them ready for construction. We will be, however, posting the preferred concept out for the public again, just to kind of circle back on the website for everyone to look at once we have developed the preferred concept.
Could you put up option 2 again, please? You'd like to just look at the seating that you're proposing in option 2, where it's located and the type of seating you're proposing.
At this point in time, we're proposing seating both within the plaza space itself, kind of along the perimeter. And then also we've indicated some seating nodes and areas to kind of accent where the foundation of the former Crystal Palace space once stood, the foundation. So we have armor stone seating kind of scattered about at those junctures, which you can see in the brown angular polygons on the screen. Again, also closer to the spray pad, because we do recognize that, if kids are using it, they'll want to be able to sit down. If parents are watching their kids, they'll want to be able to sit down. The seating itself, however, has the opportunity to change a little bit, because it is something that can be shifted in a detailed design quite easily. So if you do have any comments with respect to seating and where you'd like to see it prioritized, do let us know in the survey, and we can try and accommodate that.
The sun shelter in option 2 is the same size as the one at the Dundas Driving Park. And it is not.
Dundas Driving Park also includes, it's associated with the building too, I believe, right? Correct,
Yes.
that location?
That's correct.
So it's just a big, large overhang. Besides the fact that it has a curvature and it's an open structure, I think that'd be the similarities here. But they're really two different uses of those two amenities.
Could version 2 be made out of more natural and less environmentally impactful materials?
I think certain components of it certainly could. We as city staff are always looking for ways to be more using sourcing product that's more sustainable. So things like the sun shelter itself, and even the benches and whatever the bench selection may be. With respect to paving surfaces, we'd have to verify that with our park operations staff too. The balancing act that we as park staff always have to try and accommodate is a really a potentially new material that we may use in a park for the sake of really trying to conserve energy and resources and use more sustainable practices. But it also has to be quite durable and robust to withstand the elements, the usage, and as well as the maintenance practices that our park operations staff perform on a regular basis. So looking at sourcing materials that may be potentially new to the city would be something that we would need to consult with our parks operations staff to determine whether that is feasible or not. So at this stage, I'd like to say we will do our best efforts to source sustainable materials. At this point in time, though, however, I would often have to say that we would need to reach out to other staff to gain their approval on certain products.
Where is the accessible wheelchair bathroom? And this relates to a different project that Jonathan is not working on. So Maureen, perhaps you can speak to that.
The one that I was referencing, presently there is a washroom in the field house, which is further south, adjacent to the baseball pitch. And at present, it's not accessible. And we know that field house is used by many different groups from across the city and within the neighborhood. So there is a motion going to the December the 6th Public Works Committee meeting by me, requesting the use of area rating monies to move ahead with the feasibility and design to make it accessible.
But the other question is, will these bathrooms be open year round?
Yeah, well, there is a motion that was passed in a unanimous, I believe, council approval. It's funny how these subjects become. There was only a few of us talking about the importance of public washrooms as public infrastructure. And maybe one of the revealing things of the pandemic was there were no washrooms to be found. And there particularly were no washrooms to be found in the wintertime. As you know, there's a lot of public buildings are not winterized and we can't have the pipes on. So we identified those buildings that are winterized where we could open the washrooms, and or those buildings that would just need a few capital dollars thrown their way to make them open. So this particular facility at the pool is has been identified as one of those that actually is winterized and can be open all year round. That doesn't address the accessibility issue, however, and that is going to be forthcoming with future capital works.
Are they going to have electrical outlets in the sun shelter?
I believe we do. That's actually a really good question. And I don't know with a community park, perhaps Wes, would you know what their protocol is for that with community parks?
So we usually do include a single dual outlet in our sun shelters, but they are located typically at the highest point, and they're used for events. They're not necessarily an open source of electricity for the park. They're usually used for events, and they have a control box on them that to gain access to them. So they're not open outlets that we have exposed to at ground level typically. They're usually for an event or a feature where we can run a cord from above to provide that power source at a different location at ground level.
Okay, and then Jonathan, the one other page I'm going to ask you to show is where the survey is located.
Certainly.
Go ahead.
www.engage.hamilton.ca.
Will there be Wi-Fi in the shelter?
It's a good question. I personally don't have knowledge of whether that's specific to a shelter or not. I know that with some parks, and perhaps the counselor can chime in. I know that there are some parks within the city that have park-wide access if they have certain facilities located in them. Gage Park, for example, is one. But I think I'm going to let Councillor Wilson speak more to this because I think you have more of a knowledge and expertise on this issue.
My understanding that thanks, Jonathan. That's an excellent question and really relevant, in my opinion, on a whole bunch of fronts. My understanding that there is Wi-Fi available at Gage. That was introduced as a pilot, and it's still ongoing. My understanding is that the City of Hamilton has applied for. There's an available grant. I can't recall under which body, but the City of Hamilton has applied for an investment to move in that direction of enabling Wi-Fi in more public spaces. Because again, as what the pandemic has revealed is we have an ongoing deficit when it comes to equity and getting access to things that are online. I have offered up Victoria Park as one vehicle for that funding model, but the city has not heard back yet. As my understanding of whether it's been successful or not. I know that there's many of us who are quite eager to move in that direction for Wi-Fi in civic public spaces. That does, so the answer to your question is no, there won't be any Wi-Fi. Will there one day be Wi-Fi? I'm hopeful. Thank you to everyone for joining us this evening. Your days and your evenings are busy, and the fact that you cared to spend it with us, I think is a reflection of how much you love this space. I love it too, and I know everybody who's on the panel will seek to honor it. So we're anxious for your feedback, and please participate. And if you know of some friends or neighbors who are not able to join us tonight because of scheduling conflicts, just share the word, pass it around. It will be engage.hamilton.ca, and I trust that this video itself will be available on the Ward 1 website probably in a few days, because we'll need to edit it and get it up. But thank you again, and thank you to everyone who was with us this evening.